Hello.
Welcome back to America.
Yeah, you know what? It's really nice to be here.
It's what? Really nice to be here?
Really nice to be home, yeah. Anyway, I didn't get to tell you this because it happened the night before I went away.
This is a 2018 phone call between Deborah Charatan and her husband, Robert Durst, who was in jail at the time.
And
she's telling him a story of running into a mutual friend.
The night before I left, we went to a local restaurant where we live just to get a bite to eat. And I walk in, and who's in the restaurant? Andrew Jarecki.
Filmmaker Andrew Jarecki shared his side of the story with me in the studio.
I go to lunch with my mother in the neighborhood, and we're sitting at this restaurant on Lexington Avenue called Sette Mezzo, which is kind of a watering hole for people on the Upper East Side. And I'm talking to my mom, and we're sitting in that window table, and I have this weird feeling, kind of back of the neck feeling, and I turn and I see standing on the street outside is Deborah Charatan, standing there with her boyfriend, some said husband, Stephen Holm. And so they walk in, and they're standing on the landing about to go walk into the restaurant.
Whoa. So you walk into the restaurant, and you're going to sit down at a table?
Before I get to the table, I have to pass his table.
And I lean over and I tap her on the arm, and she turns and she looks at me and she sees me, and I say, "Hi, is it okay if I say hello?" And she says, "Yeah, okay."
So he jumps up and says to you what?
He says, "I know who you are because I looked at hours and hours of tapes of you."
So I said, "Nice to meet you. This is my mom."
So you say, "Hi, Mom," and then you go sit down at your table?
Yes. I don't want to really have a conversation with him. He's not exactly my favorite person.
And Bob wants to know if she agreed to do an interview.
Did you agree to give him an interview?
Of course not.
Hi, I'm Zach Stewart-Pontier, one of the filmmakers behind HBO's The Jinx. Welcome back to the official Jinx podcast, a show where we take you behind the scenes of Andrew Jarecki's documentary series that became a real-life murder investigation. All episodes of Part 2 are now available on Max. In the finale, It Takes a Village, we followed the McCormick family's pursuit to hold Robert Durst accountable for the death of his first wife, Kathie. Today on the podcast, we hear more about Deborah Charatan's controversial rise in the business world. Andrew testifies in front of the Westchester County Grand Jury about Kathie's murder, and he tells us about his final run-in with Bob. Andrew traveled to LA for Bob's sentencing in the murder of Susan Berman, and he brought along a very high-profile assistant.
Hello, everybody. Greg Kinnear, live with Andrew Jarecki, cruising down the 405 freeway in Los Angeles, California, approaching the courthouse just moments from now. Andrew's had a bit of a whirlwind with Bob Durst, if you will. And the story comes to an end today, ladies and gentlemen.
Are you on me, or are you on both of us?
I'm on both.
All right, so just be on me for a little while, because I don't want to hear Zach later say,
yeah, you're going to be
I
stuck
just want to
with
use a little piece, and now I
Yeah.
couldn't explain why Greg was there.
Right.
Thankfully, because this is a podcast, Andrew can explain himself why Oscar-nominated actor Greg Kinnear was there.
Greg had been very much on board for all things Jinx, really since the very beginning. I mean, Greg was like reading drafts of the All Good Things script.
Is it awkward that you didn't cast me in the movie?
I mean, it's awkward for some, not for me.
No, not for me either. I'm cool with it.
Greg was there for the whole production of the first part of the Jinx, and around the time that we learned that Bob was going to get sentenced, I said to him, this could be interesting. And, by the way, it probably makes sense to have somebody there who could film me if anything interesting happens.
What do you think Bob is feeling right now?
Let's see, it's 1:04. The sentencing hearing is going to start at 1:30. I think he's got to be feeling a little excitement because he likes being the center of attention. So, I think he's probably uncomfortable and nervous and a little miserable, but I think his brain is firing. He's thinking, what do I do next? How do I turn this to my advantage? What are my options here? How do I get out of trouble?
I think we went in the first batch of people that they let in, and we were in this kind of gallery area with the chairs in the back of the courtroom, and the rest of the courtroom was empty. Nobody was coming in yet. And so we started to look for seats. And I looked across the courtroom, and there was a little doorway. That's clearly where they bring in whoever is about to be sentenced. And I thought, oh, that must be the door. And then as I was looking at the door opens, and I see this wheelchair come poking out. And so out of the shadow comes the face of Bob Durst. And I didn't expect to see him. He definitely didn't expect to see me there. And he was being pushed toward me. We were separated by that wooden barrier between the gallery and the courtroom. And we just stared at each other. As he got closer to me, I couldn't take my eyes off him, and he couldn't take his eyes off me. There was nothing really to say in the courtroom. We weren't close enough really to be able to talk. But it was a strange kind of moment of, I don't want to say closure, but it was a sort of a moment of connection between two people that had a bunch of important experience together, that had a big impact on both of us.
It's the judgment and sentence of this court, Mr. Durst, that you be imprisoned in the state prison for the term prescribed by law. That is, life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Which is kind of a very sad sentence to hear, because it sounds like you're being sentenced to life without possibility, which is sort of what it is. It's a draconian punishment, but for a guy who's done all that Bob has done and has reached this ripe old age and has wreaked so much havoc on other people's lives, that it did feel justified. It's a notable thing to see a guy who's had so much influence on so many other people and has created so much distress in the world suddenly there, like the frog that you're dissecting in high school or something. He's just laid out, and there's just nothing new is going to happen for him. It is the end of the line.
But soon after, you got brought in to testify in front of the grand jury in Westchester.
Yeah, so I was asked if I would testify in the grand jury hearings, which were around the Kathie Durst murder disappearance, because they were considering whether they wanted to indict Bob in Westchester for Kathie's disappearance, which was something that the lawyers for the McCormicks were pushing very hard for in the background, because they knew that they were going to have trouble making a case if they couldn't get an indictment. The way that the peculiarities of the law work, basically the statute of limitations would have run out and they would not be able to bring a civil suit except if a new legal event took place and an indictment was going to qualify.
So I am driving to Westchester, to the White Plains Courthouse, to testify in front of a grand jury. I have not testified in front of a grand jury before, but I think it will be fascinating to see how this case proceeds, because there's a lot of criticism that the Westchester County District Attorney's Office kind of sat on this case for years and years, did nothing.
I remember going into this room with little desks in it and a whole group of people. I can't remember how many jurors there are, but way more than a dozen in a grand jury, and sitting at a table in the front and being asked a number of questions by the prosecutor.
Was it Laura Murphy asking you the questions?
Yeah, Laura Murphy, I believe, was the person asking me the questions.
My name is Laura Murphy. I'm an assistant district attorney in the Westchester County District Attorney's Office.
This interview Andrew did with Laura Murphy didn't make it into the doc series.
In terms of the sequencing of what you guys were doing, was it important that LA's case went first, resolved first? What was the calculus about how to sequence things?
I don't think there was a calculus on sequence. When I got involved in the case in 21, the trial in LA had already started, so that ship had sailed. The conviction of Robert Durst in LA for the killing of Susan Berman opened up legal windows for us to use some of that evidence in New York. So the trial being concluded, the trial being a conviction, was very helpful to us in New York in going forward.
Some outside observers saw the Westchester case as overkill.
I heard a lot from people, why are you doing this case? He's old, he's gonna die, he's already gonna be convicted, he already is convicted. It wasn't about Bob, it was about Kathie. It was about getting justice for Kathie. And as long as he lived, and as long as there hadn't been justice for her, to me, it was a job worth doing.
But even after Bob's conviction for the murder of Susan Berman, getting a second conviction was going to be much more challenging.
In New York, to convict him, we would have to show that he, with the intent to kill Kathleen, killed Kathleen. If a jury determined it was criminal negligence, if a jury determined it was reckless, then it would be a not guilty on the murder.
So that was a potentially big risk.
Yes.
In order to make their case as strong as possible, Laura Murphy and her team called in help from a few of the key players who reopened Kathie's case in the late 90s.
So Joe Becerra is a New York State Police investigator for well over, I'd say, 35 years. And Joe was the investigator who recommenced the investigation into Kathie's disappearance in 1999 and worked on the case back in 99 for a few years, along with the Westchester DA's office, with DA's investigators. And when I came into the case in 2021, one of the first things I did was I reached out to Joe and said, "You ready for another round of it?" And he was.
On my way out of the grand jury, I walked through the corridor and I saw Laura Murphy, and I think I said to her, "So when do you think you're going to do something here, if you do anything?" And I figured she wasn't going to be very forthcoming, but she said, "Oh, might be sooner than you think."
Okay, so I just finished testifying in White Plains in front of the grand jury, and moments later, on my way back to the city, I got a flurry of messages saying that they have now indicted Bob for the murder of his wife, Kathie. So that's a new development in a very, very old case from 1982.
Westchester County District Attorney Mimi Roca spoke about the indictment at a press conference.
Good morning. On November 1st, 2021, a grand jury in Westchester County indicted Robert Durst for the 1982 murder of his first wife, Kathleen McCormick Durst.
The Westchester case against Bob was gaining momentum. But then, just a few months later, Bob Durst finally did reach the end of the line.
I'm in the middle of interviewing Lisa DiPaolo, and I get a phone call from John Lewin.
All right, John, thanks for letting me know. Thank you. Bob Durst is deceased.
I knew it. I knew it when you said he was on the phone. I thought he'd outlive us all. I really did. Wow.
It's strangely anticlimactic, I guess. Maybe did one think that Bob was going to go out in a blaze of glory? Maybe not, but somehow it just happened, and then I did start thinking, well, what does this mean for the McCormicks?
I don't see the Westchester DA taking this to a trial now that he's dead.
The grand jury was step one. we would have been moving towards a trial, and obviously further interviews would have happened at that time.
Westchester County Assistant DA Laura Murphy spoke at a press conference after Robert Durst died.
Our case, we very much wanted to focus on what happened to Kathleen, how Kathleen disappeared, and the surrounding facts. I think the where is Kathie would have been the #1, and when he died, that died with him, which is why when he died, a lot of people was like, well, how do you feel about it? I was very conflicted, because as long as he was alive, there was always that hope and thought that you would learn more about it, what happened in those last days, which we'll never know.
Investigator Joe Becerra felt similarly.
I am very pleased that we were able to charge him in Westchester with Kathie's murder. I wasn't sure if that day was ever going to happen, though I am disappointed that he died before he could face real justice in a courtroom. I do feel I let her family down a little bit by not giving complete closure, and that is finding Kathie.
What took so long? Why? The McCormicks want answers. They deserve answers.
This is Matt Capozzoli, a lawyer representing the McCormicks in their civil suit against the Robert Durst estate.
The McCormicks are ordinary people, family people, which is what I am too. Similar sort of working class backgrounds, care about their family very, very much.
Matt has been working on the case for over 8 years. In that time, he's gotten to know a lot about Kathie Durst and what was going on in the lead up to her disappearance in 1982.
At the end of the relationship between Bob and Kathie, to your knowledge, was she trying to get a divorce?
In the months leading up to Kathie's murder, she was absolutely trying to divorce Robert Durst. And she had an attorney, a divorce lawyer, and they were trying to understand what kind of money Robert had and try to negotiate a settlement on Kathie's behalf.
We were able to look through the correspondence sent between Kathie, Bob, and their lawyers during their separation negotiations. It's a long back and forth that goes on for almost a year. And it really does seem like they're moving towards a divorce. They're discussing who's going to keep which apartment and what furniture. In one of the more heartbreaking letters from Bob, he says to Kathie, quote, "During the last 9 months, we spoke almost daily on the telephone. In the future, I prefer that we keep our conversations to a minimum." It's sad. And things start to heat up between the two sides in the months leading up to Kathie's disappearance. In one of the final letters from Kathie's lawyers, they request a long list of Bob's financial documentation. They want to know everything about him.
And was part of her trying to settle, did that involve her trying to, acquire files, financial documents?
I think at a certain point during Kathie's relationship with Robert, she obtained information that she thought she could use to help get a settlement from the Durst family, because they weren't interested in paying her a penny. But they also weren't interested in her airing their dirty laundry.
And so, to your knowledge, what did she do?
To the best of my knowledge, Kathie went to certain people in the Durst family, including Thomas Durst.
Bob's not there. Kathie and I are by ourselves.
Okay.
Kathie and I sit at a table.
In 2016, John Lewin and his team of prosecutors interviewed Tom Durst, Bob's brother. We used a little bit of this in the doc series, but he also told them about an interaction he had with Kathie in December of 1981. Kathie had invited Tom over to the apartment she used to share with Bob.
Kathie says to me, I have information that's going to destroy your family. And I think, I should go now. This is not something that I want to be a part of. So I'm feeling very, very antsy. And I didn't ask what it is. And then she says that Bob has taken away all of her money.
Okay, and she says to you, I have info that might destroy your family.
She has info that's going to destroy, will destroy my family.
Oh, will destroy her.
And she's very sorry that it's going to hurt me. She's very sorry she's going to hurt Tom Durst, but she's going to do it anyway.
What else did she?
And I didn't ask her what the information was. I said, do it. Go do it. They have lawyers. They can protect themselves. What I was afraid of is that if she kept it, she would get killed for it.
Did she say what kind of information it was? Did she say why she felt she had to come forth with this information?
Yes,
Why?
Bob was stopping her from getting a divorce.
Kathie also spoke to her own family about it.
She called me up in the morning and says, I'm coming over. I have to drop off the file.
This is Kathie's sister Mary, speaking with John Lewin back in 2018.
At this point, I didn't even know what the files were. She said, when she came in, she looked just real tired, so thin. And then she gave me the files, and she said, if anything happens to me, she said, give them to the police. That was her exact words. So we just stood there, and she said, I'm so tired, and I just held her, and we hugged each other, and then she said, I have to rest. But go inside and take a nap or sleep or stay there the whole day, whatever you have to do. And I was getting ready for work, and then when I finished getting ready for work, she had gotten up, and she said, I have to leave.
Mary said that was her last memory of interacting in person with Kathie. In an interview for part 1 of the Jinx, Kathie's friend Gilberta Najami told Andrew that she helped Kathie gather some of those files after Kathie met with her attorney.
Kathie came out and said, we need to get this paperwork. So Kathie and I went back to the apartment and started to get documents. I remember I had some of those documents. They were subsequently stolen from my home. I had made copies and given them to Kathie Traceman. And her home in New York City was burglarized. And the same set of papers disappears from my house and her house. Not a coincidence.
I just had them in a drawer. And then my apartment had been burglarized. And among other things that they were taken, those papers were taken too.
Andrew also spoke to Kathie Traceman.
What did you think about that?
You know, honestly, at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I just thought, I just figured there was newspaper articles about her disappearance also there, and I figured, they just put the jewelry in the newspaper and wrapped it up, and that was, I never really thought anything about it until I heard afterwards that Gilberta's documents had also been stolen.
What was in these files is one of the great questions of the case. Some people think that they were files that showed misdeeds of the Durst Organization, skimming money, not paying their taxes. Others think they revealed that Bob was stealing from the company himself. We'll probably never know.
And so she had documents. Do we have any sense of what those documents were?
I don't.
Isn't that the most frustrating thing in the world?
It's extremely frustrating. What's even more frustrating is somebody, somewhere, had those documents at one time. And where they ended up, I have no idea. She had shared things with her divorce attorney. I'm sure that she had files she had given to other people. And I don't know if the police never asked for them. I don't know if the police took them and destroyed them. No one knows. But they're not here today.
Today, the McCormicks have filed a wrongful death case against the estate of Robert Durst and believe that they have the evidence to prove that he was responsible for Kathie's death.
And now that Bob is gone, the question is, is Bob or Bob's estate going to be able to somehow drift out of this without being held accountable? And of course, we know that Bob's estate is Deborah Lee Charatan, Bob's wife. She steps in for Bob. She's not only the executor of the estate, sort of making decisions about it, but she's also the sole beneficiary of his trust. And I think all the other assets that he has. So she kind of becomes Bob from a legal standpoint.
So who is Deborah Lee Charatan? What's her story? Well, for starters, unlike Bob Durst, she was not born into a wealthy family.
Debbie had a very shaky beginning. You know, she grew up in Howard Beach, which is not an affluent area.
Here's Deborah Charatan speaking with Matt Capozzoli in the deposition conducted as part of the McCormick civil suit.
How would you describe your family's economic situation during your childhood?
Today, I would describe it as middle class or less.
How would you have described it as when you were a child?
Richer than I would describe it as an adult.
So you weren't wealthy?
Absolutely not.
Did your family's economic situation bother you when you were a kid?
Yes.
How so?
I didn't have security.
Her parents were both refugees from Germany, from the Holocaust. And, you know, I think they came to America with a good deal of luck. And that first generation of people that were refugees from Nazi Germany had a hard time. It was not easy for them to establish themselves or get any stability or security. I think both of her parents struggled and brought her up in a very downtrodden part of New York, certainly far from the Fifth Avenue dreams that she had. And, you know, they knew they had a pistol. They knew that they had a really smart young girl on their hands, and she went right to work. She worked in a bakery in Howard Beach. She was a hustler. She's still a hustler, but she was back then. You know, she knew that she wanted to get herself out of Howard Beach.
New York Times reporter Charles Bagley says that Debbie got out of Howard Beach through a relationship with a guy named Brad Berger.
She marries a lawyer, one of the first lawyers at that era to advertise. Not so much because he wanted to take every case into court, but he was sort of good at marketing, and he would piece off the cases, take a percentage and piece off the case to other lawyers.
And around this time, she and Brad are together, and they start a business in real estate brokerage together.
They built this firm, and what made them stand out? It was all women working, not in residential, but in commercial real estate, investment real estate. So they're going out there to work with these wealthy investors, real estate investors. They're finding buildings for them. They're getting the deal done. And she would give the women that worked for her a pile of dictates on how to dress, how to look, and how to treat your clients, and got a lot of notoriety for it.
They have this business. It's pretty successful, and they get a lot of attention for it. But at the same time, I think it wasn't easy, and clearly a lot of brokers told us that she was very tough on them.
My name is Jennifer Cherney, and I'm in commercial real estate, and I finance apartment buildings. I started out as a commercial broker in Manhattan, selling apartment buildings and commercial properties, and I started working for Deborah Charatan Berger at Beige Realty in 1981.
We heard from Jennifer briefly in the TV show, but really only scratched the surface of what she claims was a horrible experience working for Debbie.
There was certainly a reason why she hired only women. I mean, one was because it was novel, but the other was that it soon became apparent over the years that there was a control factor.
And what do you mean in relation to Debbie? What was the control issue?
Well, the control issue was that eventually she systemically decided that she didn't need to pay people.
Around this time, things between Jennifer and Debbie boiled over. Jennifer says she was young, but one of Debbie's highest earners.
I'm 22 years old. And at that point, I had deals in the hopper. I had done 19 deals in 8.5 months. I was expecting to walk in and get a check for $50,000. Instead, I walked in, and her attorney was sitting there, and they handed me a typed letter that said I was fired. And to clean out my desk, and That was it. And I was horrified, crushed. I had no idea that was coming.
And then what did you do?
I got a lawyer, and he got in touch with her attorney. They made it clear they didn't want to pay me, and we made it clear that we're not going to allow that. They tried to settle with me for half or a quarter or what, tried to negotiate, and we didn't. So she settled with me for all the money I was due.
Jennifer wasn't the only employee who felt mistreated by Debbie. In 1987, journalist Eugenie Allen got an anonymous letter telling her to look into Debbie's company.
I include her reaction in the piece, and what she says about the letter is, oh, it's really sad. There are these disgruntled people, and isn't that too bad that they're focusing on the negative? She had gotten a lot of attention for her successes, and she was a relentless self-promoter. She really knew how to get glowing publicity, and the people who had been wronged felt like it was time for someone to look more closely at the truth about her and see how she treated the people around her, not only her employees, but also her spouse and child.
Andrew spoke to New York Times reporter Charles Bagley about the end of Debbie and Brad's relationship.
So she goes up to her husband and she says, hey, you know, I'm going to go out and pick up some stuff at the store. Anything you need? Yeah, can you get me some batteries? Sure, hon. Gets in the car with the baby and drives away. Hours later, she calls and says, I'm going to divorce you. I've cleaned out the apartment and the bank accounts. And he responds, yeah, but did you get my double A's?
And this is the first time that Brad, according to him, understands there is any problem with the marriage at all. Debbie's moving on. He wasn't really taking it seriously because he thought it was such a ridiculous thing for her to be saying out of the blue.
Debbie's personal and professional problems were piling up.
At the same time, her marriage is busting up. She's in a long-term battle for custody of her son. And she ultimately gave that up, too.
Despite everything Debbie was dealing with, writer Eugenie Allen says Debbie didn't seem too concerned about whether the article would make her look bad.
I was surprised when I sat down with her that she wasn't more on guard about the content of the piece and the tone and why I was doing this. But I think that for her, any publicity is good publicity at that point in her life. She never said, I don't like where this is going, or I'm not happy with your questions. She answered everything, and she had an answer for everything.
One of the stranger details that Brad told Eugenie when she was reporting her piece was that before their split, Brad and Debbie believed that one day, Debbie could become the first female president.
This was 1987, and in describing the presidential aspirations, he said that they had actually fantasized about having their son's bar mitzvah at the White House. So the timing would have been around the year 2000 for that to happen. And she was going to displace George Bush in the public's affections.
Eugenie says that Debbie's political aspirations seemed to be mostly material.
So Kennedy had this beautiful woven rocker, rush seat rocker in the White House, and it was good for his back. So Debbie wound up getting one of these presidential rocking chairs and displaying it very proudly, and it was part of this whole effort to make it to the White House.
Eugenie's article was headlined Money Dearest, with the subheading, by age 28, Deborah Charatan had everything she wanted, but having it all has a dark side. She wasn't sure how Debbie would react.
I thought she might complain about tone, just because it's a pretty devastating story. But she actually bought extra copies of the magazine. At that time, we sold back issues of the magazine from the office. That's how it was done back then. And she sent someone over with a check, and they took a stack of magazines.
Around this time, something happened that changed Debbie's life forever.
She was struggling to balance a lot of conflict in her life. And not long after this is when she met Bob Durst. And I think that we can assume, based on her unerring nose for power and prestige and influence, that she sized him up immediately and understood exactly what he could do for her.
My interpretation is that she's been hanging in there, right, playing the long game ever since she very first met Bob and understood, even back then, that he was never going to leave his money to a child because he was never going to have a child, and he was never going to leave his money to his family. So there was money there. She intended to inherit it. She did inherit it.
But the Jinx and all its legal ripple effects for Bob Durst threatened to mess with Debbie's long game.
Is Deborah Charatan, the defendant in this action, one of your clients?
Yes.
Do you recall when you first met her?
I believe it was around 2015. It was right when the Jinx was playing.
This is Debbie's attorney, Alan Abramson, in a 2023 deposition conducted as part of the McCormick civil suit.
Do you have an understanding as to why Ms. Charatan retained a criminal attorney?
I know why she retained me.
Attorney-client privilege shielded Abramson from getting into specifics about why Debbie had hired him. But in her own deposition, the McCormick's lawyer, Matt Capizzoli, asked her directly about the Jinx.
Ms. Sheridan, did you watch the Jinx?
I did.
What did you think of it?
Not much.
Did you think it was a mistake for Robert Durst to participate in that?
Unequivocally.
The Jinx was a catastrophe, and I cooperated with it like a double idiot.
Toward the end of Bob's life, when he spoke on the phone from prison, he reflected about the choices he made, or didn't make.
I feel a whole lot that everything that is happening was decided long before I was aware that it was happening, and that it was going to happen like that no matter what I did.
One of the last visits between Bob and Debbie ends with a tender moment between the two of them.
It's time for me to go.
Okay, honey. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. It's hard for me to leave you.
Yes, that's why you're here.
I know. Okay. Bye, honey.
Bye.
Debbie gets up to leave, and Bob is left sitting alone for a few moments. Eventually, a guard comes by.
Finished, right? Finished? Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yes, Bob says. He's finished. The official Jinx podcast is hosted by me, Zach Stewart Pontier. It's produced by ZSP Media and Hit the Ground Running Films with HBO. Both parts of the Jinx are available now on Max. And we aren't done yet. Stay tuned for some extra podcast episodes coming your way very soon. This episode was produced by Ethan Oberman. The rest of our team is Laura Newcomb, Ramoy Phillip, and Naomi Bronner. The supervising producer is Liz Stiles. Editing by Simone Polanen. Mixing and engineering by Zach Schmidt. It was recorded by Brett Tubin at Relic Room in New York City. Music by the Mondo Boys, Wes Dylan Thornton and John Cusiak. Additional music courtesy of HBO. The executive producers are Andrew Jarecki and me, Zach Stewart Pontier. Special thanks to Michael Gluckstadt, Ali Cohen, Aaron Kelly, and Savon Slater at HBO Podcasts, and the fabulous Jinx team, Sam Neve, Kyle Martin, Richard Henkin, Charlotte Kaufman, Susan Lazarus, Annabelle White, Pedro Vital, Jesse Herman, Michele Zabarfian, and Nako Narder. And thanks to Ro Dillon, George Vogel, Greg Kinnear, Charlie Wessler, Nancy Jarecki, Emily Wiedemann, and you. You made it all the way through the credits again. Here's a little more of Bob and Debbie talking about the restaurant where she ran into Andrew.
It's our neighborhood place that we go to. It's very casual Italian food, you know.
Yeah, I know casual Italian food. We had casual Italian food for lunch.
Okay.
What?
Okay, that's a good thing.
Meatballs and spaghetti.
Okay, I love meatballs and spaghetti.
And that's very casual.